This is going to be a tutorial on the SN dichotomy. As you recall, in our last tutorial, we talked about the 4 different dichotomy areas. They are EI for extrovert and introvert, SN for sensor intuitive, TF for thinker and feeler, and JP for judger and perceiver. In this tutorial, we will focus in on how we gather data or information. According to Carl Jung, there are 2 functions of our personality, and that is to perceive, and the other is to judge. When we perceive, we gather data, and then we take in information and observe the world around us. When we use the judging function, we evaluate data, make decisions on the information, and critique our observations. In this tutorial, we are not making decisions. We are simply perceiving. We're gathering the information, taking it in, and observing. It's very important to know the 2 distinctions. So we're going to be looking at the perceiving function in this tutorial, and we'll be looking at sensing and intuition. In the sensing function, we really prefer facts, details, to be literal-minded, present-oriented, and we want to take in data through the 5 senses: hearing, tasting, touching, seeing, and smelling. Intuitives, on the other hand, prefer to take in information theoretically, abstractly, figuratively, and prefer to be future-oriented and take in data through the 6th sense. Let me illustrate this for you by telling you my fish story. One night, or actually one morning, we woke up, my husband and I, and we heard my daughter crying, and I immediately knew what had happened. Because I'm an intuitive, I have a 6th sense about things. I knew that her goldfish had died. I knew that because I was an intuitive, but my husband, who's a sensor, wanted to know for sure. He wanted to know the facts. He wanted to know the details. So downstairs we went, and indeed we found that her goldfish had died. You see, my husband is a sensor, and I'm an intuitive. We take in information in different ways. As a sensor, he prefers to take things in literally, is present-oriented, tangible. He prefers doing things. Many times people look at him and say, this is a down-to-earth type of guy. He prefers facts and practicality and being specific. I, on the other hand, prefer to be random, future-oriented, inspirational, theoretical, and sometimes people say that I have my head in the clouds. I prefer fantasy and ingenuity, and whereas my husband sees the trees, I see the forest and prefer to be a generalist. Well, what about you? What do you prefer? Sometimes it's easier for students to look at pictures. Sensors like looking at specific parts and pieces, where intuitives like to look at patterns and relationships. Sensors tend to prefer to live in the present and enjoy what is there. And intuitives, however, prefer to live toward the future, anticipating what might be. Sensors are good at details, and intuitives are good at ideas. Sensors also tend to prefer procedures and established routines, and they can be really good with money, handling money, whereas intuitives may prefer change and variety, and sometimes they seem to be fickle or impractical dreamers to sensors. We all need balance, however. In order to, if you are a super sensor, that's not necessarily a good thing, whereas if you're super intuitive, that's not necessarily good, because you might have difficulty handling practical matters like money. So in my workshops, I separate people The sensors are on one side and then the intuitives are on the other, and I have them describe this object, an apple. Usually I try to bring in two identical apples. And the sensors will describe the apple in one way, and the intuitives generally, they'll describe it in a different way. Sensors will say something like, you know what, it's an apple, or it's a red delicious apple. You see how they are detail-oriented about it. Sometimes they will notice even the colors. The red, they'll say it has little yellow specks in the red delicious apple. Intuitives, on the other hand, they'll look at it and the same apple and say, you know what, this is a weapon. Or maybe they'll say it's nutritious. Or the other thing they might say is it is a logo for a computer company. So you can see how intuitives are much more random. They are intuitive. They are much more theoretical about how they describe and take in information. So which are you? Do you like to take in information just as it is? Or do you like to look at things as they could be? So I'd like you to take out that white sheet of paper again, the one that has the lines on it, and it has your name on the upper right-hand side and the left-hand side, and I'd like you to put S and then N, because that's the dichotomy that we just talked about. And if you feel that you are a sensor, I'd like you to circle it. Okay? If you don't feel that you are a sensor, then what I'd like you to do is to circle the N for intuitive. And then if you're not sure at all, put a line right down the middle. So again, this has been a video on how we gather information. It is the second of the 4 dichotomy areas, and it is specifically on how we gather information. It is how we prefer to perceive the world and observe the world around us. In our next tutorial, we'll be looking at how we make decisions.